The dust in Twin Creek tasted like anger. It swirled down the main street, sticking to the sweat on your neck, rattling the loose sign over the mercantile until it screamed. Late afternoon, late autumn, 1882. The sun was already bleeding out behind the ridge, throwing shadows that looked like long, grasping fingers. The street was dead quiet, except for the crowd. They were gathered near the sheriff's post, a tight knot of faces, red and twisted. Some with rage, some with that ugly kind of excitement people get when they smell blood. And in the middle of it all was a girl. Her name was Tez. Her wrists were tied to the crossbar over her head, ropes digging deep. Her cheeks were scraped raw where they'd dragged her. Her deerskin dress was torn, one shoulder bare, the collar ripped so low she had to clutch it with her bound hands just to hold it together. The cold air stung her skin, but it wasn't the chill making her stomach twist. It was the stares, the hungry, hateful stares. She'd been caught stealing bread, one small loaf. The storekeeper had roared like a bear, and half the town came running. They didn't want to hear her side. They just wanted a show. So they tied her to the post to wait for the sheriff. They told her she'd be whipped. An example. She'd stood there for hours, back screaming, legs shaking. She didn't cry. Not where they could see. She just kept her eyes on the dirt and counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. Then the sound that split the air. Crack. The whip hit the dirt beside her, just a little warning shot. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. The man holding it, a big brute with a smirk, rolled his shoulders, warming up for the real thing. He was enjoying this. They all were. And that's when a shadow detached itself from the wall of the saloon. He was tall, his coat dusty from a long trail, the brim of his hat pulled low. A Henry rifle hung easy over his shoulder. He wasn't from this town, you could tell that right away. His name was Colt Maddox, and he'd been riding for weeks, staying nowhere long enough to grow roots. He kept his distance from people. He'd learned that lesson the hard way years back, when a posse he led walked straight into an ambush. The memory was a stone in his gut, but some things still made his blood run cold, and the sight of a mob about to whip a half-starved girl was one of them. He crossed the street, slow and deliberate, his boots crunching in the dirt. He stopped a few feet from the post. He didn't raise his voice, but when he spoke, every single person heard it. Untie her. The man with the whip spat a brown stream of tobacco juice. Sheriff said she stays till he gets back. Colt's hand didn't rush. It just moved. The rifle came off his shoulder, held easy in front of him, the barrel pointed at the ground but ready to swing up in a heartbeat. His eyes were flat, calm, like chips of winter ice. He looked at the whip man, then at the rest of them. I said, he repeated, the words like stones dropping into a deep well. Untie her. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Someone coughed. A woman pulled her son back, shielding his eyes. The whip man's smirk faltered. He looked at the rifle, then at Colt's face, and he saw nothing there. No anger, no fear, just a promise. He muttered something under his breath and took a step back. Colt moved forward. He didn't look at the crowd. His focus was on the rope. With steady hands, he worked the knot loose and eased Tez's arms down. They shook uncontrollably. Her knees gave out, and she would have hit the dirt if he hadn't caught her, his big hand closing around her elbow, holding her up until she found her balance. She looked up at him just for a second and saw eyes that were hard, but not cruel. He shrugged out of his heavy trail coat and swung it over her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, but she pulled it tight, burying her face in the smell of leather and wood smoke, breathing like she'd just broken the surface after being held underwater. He didn't look back. He put a hand on her back and guided her forward, walking her right through the silent crowd and out of town. No one dared to follow. They walked until they reached the cottonwood grove where he'd left his horse. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her, his presence a solid wall at her back. He kept the horse at a slow, easy trot the whole way to his cabin. Not a single word passed between them. The cabin was small, tucked back against the trees as dusk settled over the valley. Smoke curled from the chimney. He lifted her down as gently as he'd put her up, his hands firm. Inside, he lit a lamp, stoked the fire, and slid a tin plate of beans and a cup of water across the rough-hewn table. He didn't sit with her. He just stepped back, giving her space. Tez ate with shaking hands. The food was a knot in her throat, but she forced it down. She glanced at him once, quick, but he wasn't watching her. He was staring into the fire, arms folded, like he was trying to read the future in the flames. When she was done, he just pointed a thumb toward a bedroll near the hearth. "You can sleep there." She nodded, clutching the heavy coat around her, the words of thanks stuck in her throat. He hung his hat on a peg, sat on his own bunk, and began to clean his revolver. The methodical clicks of the metal were the only sound besides the hiss of the fire. Soon, he lay back, turning to face the wall. Tez curled up on the bedroll. She listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, the sound a strange comfort in the deep quiet of the valley. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she wasn't afraid. She was just waiting. But she wasn't waiting for sleep. She was waiting for him to lower his guard, because this man, this stranger who had saved her, wore a secret on his skin, a secret she recognized. Tucked away on the inside of his left wrist, half hidden by his cuff, was a scar, a pale, jagged line in the shape of a lightning bolt, and she knew exactly where he got it. The first hint of dawn was a pale gray smear through the cabin window when Colt's eyes snapped open. He was a man who woke fast, a habit learned in hard country. The air smelled of cold ash. He sat up, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver beside his bunk. The cabin was silent, too silent. The bedroll by the hearth was empty, neatly rolled but empty. He stood, moving to the door in 2 silent strides. He looked out. His coat was gone. For a long minute, he just stood there, listening to the wind sighing through the pines. The valley was still and empty. She was gone. He let out a slow breath. He wasn't surprised. Most people who stumbled into his life left by first light. It was how he preferred it. No ties, no tangles, no one to drag into the shadow of his past. He ate cold beans from the can, saddled his horse ready to ride into town. But then, a flicker of movement by the fence line caught his eye. It was her. She was standing there, the coat still wrapped around her shoulders, her dark hair loose in the wind. She'd washed the dirt from her face in the creek, and she held herself straighter now, less like a kicked dog and more like a wolf waiting. "I came back," she said, her voice low. Colt's jaw was a hard line. Part of him, the part that had kept him alive this long, wanted to tell her to keep walking, but he saw the exhaustion in her shoulders, the cold seeping into her bones. He just gave a curt nod toward the woodpile. "If you're staying," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "We need wood for the fire." Her dark eyes searched his, looking for a trap. Finding none, she moved to the woodpile and began carrying logs, her movements slow but deliberate, as if each piece of wood was a price she was paying for his protection. Inside, he warmed up the rest of the beans, adding a strip of jerky. They ate in silence. He could feel her watching him, waiting for the questions. "Why did you steal? Who are you? Where are you from?" He didn't ask. He wasn't the kind of man to pry a story out of someone. When they finished, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll go if you want me to." He shook his head. "You're fine here." The simple words seemed to drain the tension from her shoulders. She spent the rest of the morning moving quietly through the cabin, sweeping the floor, fetching water, her silence a presence all its own. He noticed her wince every time she put weight on her left ankle, where the rope had rubbed it raw. Without a word, he found a clean rag, poured a splash of whiskey on it, and handed it to her. She flinched as the liquor stung the wound, but she tied it tight. By the afternoon, a strange rhythm had settled between them. He sat by the fire, oiling his rifle. She sat on the bench, mending a tear in one of his shirts, her stitches small and neat. She was good with a needle. He tried not to watch her, but his eyes kept drifting. He noticed the way her hands moved, the intense focus on her face. He noticed the worn deerskin of her dress, the collar still gaping where it had been torn. His jaw tightened. He stood, fetched his own sewing kit from a shelf, and held it out. "Give me the dress." She froze, her hands flying to her chest, a flash of pure terror in her eyes. For a second, she thought he meant something else entirely. Then she saw the needle and thread in his rough hand, and her expression shifted. She handed it to him, her fingers brushing his. Colt crouched by the fire, the big rifle lying forgotten beside him, and with surprising care, he stitched the torn collar back together. His hands, more used to the cold steel of a gun, were steady. When he was done, he handed it back. That evening, as darkness pressed in on the small cabin, she finally spoke. "They said I stole." Her voice was low but clear across the crackling fire. Colt looked at her. "Did you?" "Yes," she said, not looking away. "I hadn't eaten in 3 days. I tried to find work. They just laughed at me." He nodded once, slow. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't offer judgment. He just let the truth of it sit in the air between them. "You're safe here," he said finally. Those 3 words seemed to break something in her. Her throat tightened, and she looked away, toward the fire. She curled up on her bedroll, but this time she didn't turn her back to him. She watched him as he cleaned his revolver again, the firelight glinting on the steel. His face was a mask, impossible to read, but there was no anger in it. Only a deep, quiet watchfulness. "That scar," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. "On your wrist." Colt's hands stilled. He slowly looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What about it?" "The lightning bolt," she said, her own voice trembling slightly. "My father, he described the man who led the posse, the one who survived. He said he had a scar just like it." Colt put the revolver down. The whole cabin seemed to hold its breath. "Who was your father?" "He was the scout," she whispered, and now the tears she'd held back in town began to trace paths through the grime on her cheeks. "His name was Black Owl. He was with your men at Devil's Canyon." The stone in Colt's gut twisted, sharp and vicious. Devil's Canyon. The name was a curse. The place where his life had ended and this hollow existence had begun. He'd thought he was the only one who walked away. "Your father is dead," he said, the words flat and hard. He'd seen it himself. "I know," she said, her voice cracking. "And I know who killed him. That's why I was in that store. I wasn't stealing bread, not really. I was after the proof." Colt felt the air leave his lungs. This girl, this half-starved thief he'd pulled down from a whipping post, hadn't just stumbled into his life. She was a ghost from his past, and she was dragging him right back into the hell he'd spent 5 years trying to escape. Colt stared at her, the crackling of the fire filling the sudden, heavy silence. "Proof of what?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "A book," Tez said, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "A small leather ledger. The storekeeper, Silas, he keeps it in a lockbox under his counter. My father was meticulous. He wrote everything down, names, dates, payments. He knew something was wrong with that payroll escort. He didn't trust the new sheriff." The name Silas hit Colt like a physical blow. Silas Kane, a man he remembered as a bitter, failed prospector who haunted the saloons on the edge of the territory. He'd never figured him for a storekeeper or a killer. "He killed your father for that ledger?" "He was there," she said, her voice gaining a cold edge of certainty. "After the ambush, when the shooting stopped, Silas and his men moved through the dead. They were looking for something. My father was still alive, hidden in the rocks. He saw Silas take the ledger from the marshal's saddlebag. Then, Silas found him. He took my father's knife and the ledger. The story clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The ambush had been too perfect, the trail they'd followed too clean. It was a setup from the start. They hadn't been chasing bandits. They'd been led to the slaughter, and this girl's father had the names of the men who did it. The storekeeper in Twin Creek, Colt said, more to himself than to her. He was one of them. He's the leader, she corrected. The sheriff is his brother. The man with the whip, Jed, he's their muscle. That whole town, it's theirs. They built it with the money they stole. Colt stood up and began to pace the small cabin, a caged animal. He'd run from this for 5 years. He'd buried his men, buried his name, and tried to bury the guilt. But it had found him. It had walked right up to his fence line wearing his own coat. He stopped, his back to her, and stared out the dark window. Why come back? Why risk the whipping post for a book? For justice, she said simply. It's all I have left of him. His name. They called him a traitor, said he led you into the trap. That ledger proves he was trying to warn you. Colt turned around slowly. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, not as a victim, but as a fighter, a daughter trying to clear her father's name. In her eyes, he saw the same fire that had once burned in him, before it had been smothered by loss and regret. All right, he said, the word feeling heavy and final. We're going back to town. Her eyes widened. But they'll be looking for us. I know, Colt said, his hand going to the rifle resting against the wall. This time, we won't be buying supplies. The next morning dawned cold and sharp, a sky the color of iron. They rode out together, Tez mounted behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. This time, there was no fear in her grip, only a grim determination. As they approached Twin Creek, they didn't take the main road. Tez guided him along a high ridge, a path only a native would know, that overlooked the town. From their vantage point, they could see the whole layout. The mercantile, the sheriff's office, the saloon. It looked like any other dusty settlement. But now Colt saw it for what it was. A predator's den. Silas never leaves the store, Tez whispered, her breath warm against his back. He keeps the ledger in a floor safe beneath a bearskin rug in his back office. How do you know that? I worked for him once, she said, her voice tight. Cleaning, before he realized who I was. I saw him put it there. Colt scanned the street. Jed, the whip man, was leaning against a post outside the saloon, watching everyone who came and went. The sheriff was nowhere to be seen. We need a distraction, Colt said. Something big enough to pull both Silas and Jed out of that store. Tez was silent for a long moment. Then she said, There's a weekly supply wagon. It comes through this afternoon from the east. It carries blasting powder for the mines up north. A slow, dangerous idea began to form in Colt's mind. It was reckless. It was insane. It was the kind of plan that got men killed, but it was all they had. Stay here, he told her, swinging his leg over the horse. Keep watch. If you see me ride out with my hat in my hand, it means run. Ride north and don't look back. She grabbed his arm. Where are you going? To light a fire, he said, his face grim. He moved down the slope, using the rocks and scrub for cover, circling around the back of the town. He found the wagon road easily enough. He didn't have to wait long. The rumble of heavy wheels and the braying of mules reached him first. He stepped out from behind a rock formation, his revolver in his hand, but pointed at the ground. The driver, a skinny man with a nervous twitch, pulled the team to a halt. Just need to borrow your wagon, Colt said calmly. The driver's eyes widened at the sight of the gun. He nodded, fumbling with the reins. Colt didn't want to hurt him, but as he took the reins, he saw the driver's eyes flick past him, toward the town. A flicker of recognition, a flash of fear. and that's when Colt realized his mistake. This driver wasn't just some random teamster. He was one of them. He was part of Silas's crew. The driver's hand shot inside his coat. Colt didn't hesitate. His revolver came up, barking once. The driver crumpled from his seat, a look of surprise on his face. Colt swore under his breath. The gunshot would have been heard all over town. The plan was already shot to hell. He had seconds, not minutes. He leaped onto the wagon, grabbing the reins, and slapped them hard against the mules' backs. The heavy wagon lurched forward, careening down the road toward Twin Creek. He could hear shouting from the town already. Jed was running from the saloon, rifle in hand. Colt didn't slow down. He steered the wagon straight for the front of the mercantile. He saw Silas's face appear in the window, mouth open in a silent O of disbelief. Colt aimed the wagon, pulled his revolver, and fired 2 quick shots at the hitches connecting the mules to the wagon itself. The leather straps snapped. The terrified mules veered away, leaving the massive wagon, loaded with crates of blasting powder, rolling on its own momentum. It was headed straight for the front porch of the mercantile. Colt didn't wait to see the impact. He leaped from the driver's seat, hitting the ground in a roll, and came up running. He sprinted for the alley between the mercantile and the smithy, the sounds of chaos erupting behind him. The wagon smashed into the porch with a sound like thunder, splintering wood and shattering glass. Crates of blasting powder tumbled into the street. The distraction was bigger than he'd planned, and now the whole town was hunting for him. He flattened himself against the rough wood of the alley wall, his heart pounding, revolver still hot in his hand. He could hear Jed yelling his name, the sheriff shouting orders. They knew he was here. He glanced back up at the ridge. Tez was still there, a small, still figure against the sky. She hadn't run. He took a deep breath. Phase 1 was a disaster. Now, for Phase 2, he had to get inside that store. The alley stank of horse manure and stale beer. Colt risked a quick look around the corner. The whole street was in an uproar. Men were running toward the crashed wagon, some trying to douse the spilled powder, others just shouting. Silas was standing on the ruined porch of his store, his face purple with rage, a shotgun in his hands. Perfect. Colt slipped back into the shadows and ran, silent as a ghost, to the back of the mercantile. He knew from Tez that there was a single window to the back office, usually barred. He'd brought a pry bar from his saddlebag. The bar was thick, the wood of the window frame old and dry. It splintered with a sickening crack. He froze, listening. Nothing but the shouts from the front. He pried the second bar loose and slipped through the opening, landing in a crouch inside the office. It was dark, smelling of dust and ledgers and greed. A large bearskin rug lay on the floor, just as Tez had said. He kicked it aside. Underneath was a trapdoor with a heavy iron ring. The safe. He pulled, his muscles straining. The door lifted, revealing a small, dark hole and a heavy, black safe. It was an old model, solid iron. He didn't have time to crack it. But he'd planned for this. He pulled 2 small sticks of dynamite from his coat pocket, a short fuse already attached. He'd taken them from one of the crates on the wagon. He wedged them into the seam of the safe door, lit the fuse with a match, and scrambled back out the window. He didn't run far, just dove behind a stack of rain barrels at the corner of the building. The fuse was short, maybe 5 seconds. He counted. 1, 2, 3. The explosion was a dull, muffled whoomp, not as loud as a gunshot, but powerful enough to shake the ground. Dust and smoke billowed out of the broken window. Before the smoke even cleared, he was back inside. The safe door was mangled, hanging crookedly on one hinge. Inside, amidst scattered papers and bags of coin, was a small, leather-bound book. The ledger. He grabbed it, shoving it inside his coat. His heart was hammering. He'd done it. He had the proof. He turned to leave, and his blood ran cold. Silas was standing in the doorway that led to the main store. the double-barreled shotgun leveled right at Colt's chest. His face was a mask of pure hatred. "I knew you'd come for this," Silas hissed. "That little squaw's brat. Should have finished her when I had the chance." "It's over, Silas," Colt said, his own revolver held steady, aimed at the storekeeper's head. It was a standoff. "Over?" Silas laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "It's just getting started. I own this town. I own the law. You think that little book is going to change anything?" From behind Silas, another figure appeared in the doorway. It was the sheriff, his brother, his own gun drawn. But he wasn't looking at Colt. His eyes were fixed on Silas. "Brother," the sheriff said, his voice shaking, "just give him the book. It ain't worth this." "Shut up, you coward," Silas spat, never taking his eyes off Colt. "You were always weak." "Don't do this, Silas," the sheriff pleaded, but it was too late. Colt saw the decision in Silas's eyes. He saw the knuckles on the shotgun tighten. He knew Silas would rather die than give up the empire he'd built on murder. Silas was going to shoot. Colt was going to shoot. They'd both die in this dusty little room. And then, something moved in the shadows behind the sheriff. It was Tez. She must have come down from the ridge, must have slipped in through the back during the chaos. She was holding a heavy iron skillet from the store's main room. Before anyone could react, she swung it with all her might against the back of the sheriff's head. He went down like a sack of grain, his gun clattering on the floorboards. The sudden movement was all the opening Colt needed. He dove to the side as the shotgun roared, the blast tearing a hole in the wall where his head had been a second before. He landed hard, his shoulder screaming in protest, but his aim was true. His revolver bucked in his hand. Silas staggered back, a look of stunned surprise on his face. A dark red stain blossomed on the front of his shirt. He looked down at it, then back up at Colt. He opened his mouth to say something, but only a gurgle came out. He crashed to the floor, the shotgun falling from his lifeless hands. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ringing in Colt's ears. He slowly got to his feet, the ledger clutched in one hand, the revolver in the other. Tez was standing over the unconscious sheriff, the skillet still gripped in her hands, her eyes wide. "It's done," she whispered. Colt looked from the dead storekeeper to the groaning lawman on the floor. He knew it wasn't that simple. Jed was still outside. The whole town was still loyal to the money Silas paid them. They hadn't won. They'd just kicked the hornet's nest. "Not yet," Colt said, grabbing her arm. "Let's go. Now." They scrambled out the back window, just as Jed and two other men burst through the front door of the store. They heard the shouts of discovery, the roar of rage from Jed. They ran. They didn't stop for the horse. They just plunged into the wilderness behind the town, the precious ledger pressed against Colt's chest. They were fugitives now, with the truth in their hands and a whole town of killers at their backs. The sun was setting, and the long, cold night was just beginning. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs felt like lead. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter behind them, swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. They finally collapsed at the edge of a small creek, hidden by a thicket of willows. The moon was rising, casting a pale, ghostly light over the landscape. Tez drank from the creek, splashing cold water on her face. Colt kept watch, his revolver never leaving his hand, his ears straining for any sound. "We have it," Tez said, her voice breathless. "We have the proof." Colt pulled the ledger from his coat. In the moonlight, he flipped through the pages. It was all there. Names he recognized. Men from the territory he knew were crooks and killers. Dates that lined up with the payroll shipment. And the final entry detailing the payout to each man after the ambush at Devil's Canyon. At the top of the list was Silas Kane. Right below him was his brother, Sheriff Kane, and Jedediah "Jed" Stone. Black Owl's name was there too, but next to it, his father had written a single word: warned. He'd tried to stop it. "He tried to tell me," Colt said, his voice thick with an old, familiar guilt. The night before, he said the trail felt wrong. I didn't listen. I was too arrogant, too sure of myself. You can't blame yourself, Tez said softly, her hand finding his in the dark. You didn't know. I should have, he said, the words torn from him. They were my men. A twig snapped in the woods behind them. Instantly, Colt was on his feet, pushing Tez behind him, the revolver up and ready. They were silent, listening. The forest was still, too still. Then, a voice from the darkness. Drop the gun, Maddox. It was Jed. He stepped out from behind a massive pine tree not 20 feet away. He wasn't alone. 2 other men fanned out on either side of him, their own guns drawn. They had circled around, using their knowledge of the land to cut them off. They were trapped. It's over, Jed said with a cruel smile. The sheriff's got a lump on his head and Silas is dead. The town wants blood, your blood, and the girls. Colt's mind raced. There was no way to shoot their way out of this. 3 guns to his 1. What do you want, Jed? Colt asked, stalling for time. The book, Jed said, nodding toward the ledger in Colt's hand. And you, the girl, can watch. A cold dread settled in Colt's stomach. He knew what that meant. He looked at Tez. Her face was pale in the moonlight, but her eyes were defiant. She shook her head slightly, a silent message. Don't give it to them. He knew she was right. If they gave up the ledger, they were dead. Their only chance was to fight. But how? Then he saw it. Over Jed's shoulder, much farther up the wooded slope, a faint, flickering light. A lantern. Someone else was out there. Was it more of Jed's men, or something else? He had to take the chance. All right, Jed, Colt said, slowly raising his left hand in a gesture of surrender. He held the ledger out. You want the book? Come and get it. Jed's smile widened. He took a step forward, gesturing for one of his men to circle around and grab it. It was the moment Colt was waiting for. Now, Tez! He yelled. Tez didn't hesitate. She grabbed a fist-sized rock from the creek bed and hurled it with all her strength, not at Jed, but at the man to his left. It struck him square in the temple with a sickening thud. He dropped without a sound. At the same instant, Colt dropped to one knee and fired. His shot caught the man on the right in the chest. Jed, caught by surprise, fired his own gun, but his shot went wild, splintering the tree above Colt's head. Colt's revolver was already swinging toward Jed. But before he could pull the trigger, another shot rang out, this one from up the slope. It wasn't from a pistol. It was the deep, booming crack of a heavy rifle. Jed cried out and stumbled backward, dropping his gun, his hand clutching a bloody hole in his shoulder. He stared up into the darkness, his face a mask of confusion. A figure emerged from the trees, walking into the moonlight. It was an old man, tall and wiry, with long gray braids and a face like carved leather. He held a Winchester rifle that looked as old as he was. That's far enough, Jedediah, the old man said, his voice calm and steady. Tez gasped. Kia, she breathed. It was her grandfather. Jed stared at the old man, then at Tez, and understanding dawned on his face. You brought him. Colt realized the truth. When Tez had gone back to the cabin that first morning, she hadn't just been scouting. She'd gone to her family's camp, hidden deep in the hills. She'd warned them. The lantern he saw wasn't a threat. It was help arriving. Kia walked forward, his rifle never wavering from Jed's chest. More figures began to emerge from the woods behind him. 12 men, all armed, all silent. They surrounded the clearing. Jed looked at the circle of grim-faced warriors, then at his 2 men lying on the ground. The fight was gone from him. He slumped to his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder, defeated. Justice hadn't come from a sheriff's badge or a courtroom. It had come from the very people Silas and his men had terrorized and cheated for years. Kia looked at Colt, his ancient eyes seeming to see right through him. He gave a single, slow nod. Then he looked at his granddaughter, and his stern face softened with pride. Colt lowered his revolver, the adrenaline finally starting to fade, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its place. He looked at Tez, standing beside him, no longer a victim, but a warrior who had helped reclaim her father's honor. The fight for Twin Creek was over. The sun rose on a changed valley. Kiya and his men took Jed and the unconscious thug back to their camp. The town of Twin Creek woke up to find its leader dead and its muscle gone. The sheriff, nursing a massive headache and a bigger dose of fear, was only too happy to cooperate when a U.S. Marshal, summoned by one of Kiya's riders, arrived a few days later. The ledger told the whole story. The conspiracy unraveled, the stolen money was recovered, and the remaining members of Silas's gang were rounded up. Colt and Tez spent hours with the marshal, giving their testimony. Black Owl's name was officially cleared. He was hailed as a hero who had tried to prevent a massacre. When it was all over, the marshal turned to Colt. "Maddox," he said, "that was some fine work. The service could use a man like you back. There's a badge waiting for you if you want it." It was everything Colt had thought he'd lost. His name, his reputation, a chance to be the man he was before Devil's Canyon. He looked at the marshal, then his eyes found Tez. She was standing on the porch of his cabin, what was left of it after the townspeople had torched it in their rage. She was looking out over the valley, her father's name finally at peace. She didn't look back at him, but he knew she was waiting for his answer. He thought of the trail, the lonely nights, the endless running. He thought of the weight of the badge, the ghosts it would carry. Then he thought of the quiet warmth of the fire in the cabin, the feeling of her hand in his, the simple rightness of standing beside her. He turned back to the marshal and shook his head. "Thank you, sir," he said. "But I think my fighting days are done. I've found something here worth building, not chasing." The marshal nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Colt standing in the dusty street of a town that was finally free. Colt walked back to the cabin. Tez turned as he approached. "You didn't take it," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he said, stopping in front of her. "I'm not that man anymore." "Who are you then?" she asked softly. He reached out and took her hand. "I'm the man who's going to help you rebuild this cabin," he said. "If you'll have me." A slow smile spread across her face, the first true, unguarded smile he had ever seen from her. It lit up her whole face, chasing away the last of the shadows. "The roof is first," she said. "It needs to be strong enough to keep out the winter snow." Colt squeezed her hand, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. The past was finally where it belonged, behind him. The future was here, standing right in front of him, smelling of wood smoke and courage. Together they turned and looked at the charred bones of the little cabin, not seeing a ruin, but a beginning. If you enjoyed this story of justice and a new beginning, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales from the forgotten corners of history. And let us know in the comments what you think. Can a person ever truly outrun their past? Thanks for watching.